An intellectual carrot. The mind boggles.
You see? You see? You're stupid minds. Stupid! Stupid!
Earth has had Santa Claus long enough. We will bring him to Mars.
I've been afraid a lot of times in my life. But I didn't know the real meaning of fear until I had kissed Becky.
One thing will be clear. It's not for man to interfere in the ways of God.
It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Earth vs. Soup, episode 132. I'm Aaron Pollier.
And I'm Darlene.
We watched a sequel today that we've been meaning to watch. Like we've said in the past, we're trying to alternate between science fiction films and some of the old Universal horror / Hammer horror films to get a good, spectrum of movies. So this movie that we watched was Bride of Frankenstein from 1935. April 1935. So there's lots of connections, obviously, with Frankenstein. We have Boris Karloff returning as the monster. We have James Whale. It's James Whale, right? I'm not screwing that up. Yeah, James Whale is the director, who also directed, Frankenstein and Old Dark House. So there's lots of connections also with Old Dark House that we've already reviewed. I forget which episode number that was. It's really not a science fiction film, but I think it's worth watching. We have a man in here called, the actor's name is...
116.
It's episode 116, Old Dark House. Ernst Thesiger, whichever. He plays Dr. Pretorius in this movie, but he was also in Old Dark House with Boris Karloff and James Whale directing. Is there any other weird connections? We have the same person playing Henry Frankenstein in this. We have the return of the little girl that played Maria, but she's not playing Maria because Maria was killed in the first movie.
She's just one of the village girls.
She appears as a different girl. You've seen this movie before, right, Darlene?
That one, yes.
Yeah. Bride of Frankenstein. So
I didn't remember that the first part of it had Mary Shelley. Maybe it got cut out.
See, okay, I've obviously seen Bride of Frankenstein before. Again, this falls into the category. It's a Universal monster movie. My mom loved these, so I watched these with my mom. I've seen Bride of Frankenstein multiple times. There are things that I did not remember in this film either. But Mary Shelley at the beginning.
Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, and Percy Shelley talking in that room.
Yeah, so we should start talking about the plot, and then we're going to get into
one of the things I wanted to say is the person that plays Mary Shelley also plays the bride of Frankenstein.
Yes, and she does not look very similar. Let's put it that way. Elsa Lanchester. Lancaster, yeah. She does a fantastic job in this with the very limited stuff that she was given. She clearly did a good job with being Mary Shelley. And by the way, let's talk about this opening scene. Let's just talk about the opening scene first, because it's one of the things I really honestly did not remember.
It's a stormy night.
Yeah, I wrote down a dark and stormy night at a castle. And I started writing, I think it's supposed to be, this is like Lord Byron and the Shelleys, correct?
Yes.
It's like both Shelleys.
And the Shelleys are married at this time, so it has to be...
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah, after the writing of Frankenstein, after that famous night where they told the story, okay? At first I thought, are they mistelling the story of that night? Because this shouldn't be a castle. Why is she being referred to as Mary Shelley? Because she wasn't married yet to Percy Shelley. And where is her friend who's there on that proper dark and stormy night that they told?
And I gotta say, there is this huge window that I would never think that anything would except like a garden would have, a conservatory.
It was an interesting set.
Yes, but it was a huge window.
It was confusing. It was a confusing scene because at first you're assuming that it's a mistelling of the original happening where Mary Shelley, well, she wasn't Mary Shelley at the time, but came up with the idea of Frankenstein. Because it's clearly Lord Byron. And you go, oh, okay, well, there's this woman there.
Wollstonecraft.
Okay.
That is the maiden name.
Wollstonecraft.
And her mom was the feminist.
Oh, okay.
That's well known for breaking all the rules of.
So this is they're talking about how the book has been published of Frankenstein, and Byron is, I guess, talking about all of the stories that they told that night and how they've all become famous. And Mary starts talking about, well, my story doesn't end, and maybe I should publish the second part of my story. And they're like, oh, well, it's a dark and stormy night like that original night. Why don't you tell the tale that is supposed to continue? Because my characters, the characters that you talked about really didn't die. Well, to me, they did, except Henry. Okay, so if you watch the first Universal film, and we're only going by Universal, Henry does not die. Henry Frankenstein does not die.
He gets thrown off the...
But he's in bed, right?
No, you never see...
Yeah, when his father, the Baron, comes out of the room in the first movie, in Frankenstein, he's in bed with Elizabeth tending to him. Okay, so the beginning of this story is confusing as hell. Because Henry Frankenstein is dead. His father has died somewhere along the line, the Baron Frankenstein. So Henry Frankenstein now inherits the title.
Yes.
And the monster has survived. And this adds into Frankenstein meets the Wolfman later on. That there's, I guess, this tower that they're at in this movie has the dam nearby, which is helping power everything, even though they don't need that power.
Except that whole building is totally destroyed. There is a few things that I forgot to say about the movie. It's 75 minutes long. The budget was $397,000, and it box office at $2 million.
So it wasn't as successful as Frankenstein, but it was still successful. Very successful. I don't want to go over a lot of the plot. And the reason I say that, Darlene, you can argue with me, we can talk about certain scenes, is that this is effectively the same plot as the first movie, with a couple distinctions, a couple differences. The first is the addition of the character of Dr. Pretorius.
Yes, there's also the character Minnie that is dry. It just makes me want to just knock over this woman.
Okay.
She's a servant or something to the Baron.
There's also the blind man,
I liked him. He was cool.
He was fantastic, and the monster speaks in this, by the way.
Yeah.
Now, that is fine. I'm actually okay with it. He learns it slowly.
There's a lot of Christian religious
symbolism
in it. There's also a lot of Christian stuff like the cross, the Jesus on a cross in a cemetery. You normally don't see that.
Huge one. you also see the monster tearing down religious iconography.
Yes, but what do they do to the monster when they catch him? They put him on a cross.
Yeah, I know.
And throw him into a back of a...
But, Darlene, it's not just there's Christian symbolism in this, because this isn't a Christian film, to put it that way. I think it's incidental. The Christian symbology is incidental to this film, but there is a crap ton of really, really obscure alchemical and magical ideas in this that I had to pause the movie at multiple times while we were watching it, because as we've talked about on Earth versus Soup many times, I have read many very strange things. And I had to pause the movie multiple times, and I go,
And-
Darlene, this is messed up.
And Frankenstein is the monster in this one. You know,
He is.
the monster is the evil in this.
Yeah.
He starts off okay. Then all the females keep screaming at his face, especially that Minnie.
Okay, well, hold on. Is the monster
Scared of fire?
Is the monster the antagonist in this? In some ways, yes, but he is not the villain in this.
The villain is Dr. Pretorius.
Yeah. You could even say that Dr. Frankenstein, he's not doctor because he's never he dropped out of medical school, so he doesn't have a medical degree. Henry Frankenstein, Baron Frankenstein, is also somewhat a villain in this. I would even go so far to say that the only person that genuinely could be considered a white hat in this movie is Elizabeth Frankenstein. She's done nothing wrong. Like, she does nothing wrong. She actually seemingly cares about everybody and is worried, and
for the few seconds that they have,
she's not on screen very much.
The monster's bride.
She's a victim.
She's a victim, and all she's doing the one thing that everybody did in the beginning of the movie to Frankenstein, which is absolutely just scream.
Okay, well, let's get in. So let's talk about Dr. Pretorius first. Let's talk about Dr. Pretorius, because I think we can agree that the two big deviations from the original movie is the addition of Dr. Pretorius and the Hermit.
Yes.
And then the addition of the bride in the last 5 minutes. So we can talk about these three things.
But you have the monster kills Hans, which is the little girl's father, and the mother.
Kills them.
And right in the beginning.
Yeah.
Throws them into the bottom of the mill.
The mill's basement that has water in it. That's how the monster survived.
He fell into the water.
And then he's chased. He's chased for an hour.
He's chased for days.
By dogs and villagers. They catch him. They throw him in the basement of a...
And there's a different mayor.
The Burgermeister. Yeah, played by a different person. But again, let's talk about Dr. Pretorius. Dr. Pretorius is introduced by saying that... he's the one that says Henry is the Baron now. Like, how does Dr. Pretorius know that Henry's the Baron? Like, he's the first person to kind of introduce this fact. I guess he knows that Henry's father died somehow, like he was attending to him. But we learned that Dr. Pretorius went to the university with Henry.
Mentor or something, because he says... Henry says something about... God, I don't even have that in my notes. But I do remember...
He was working on like life, bringing back, life from death. So hold on. Again, let's just talk about him. When he is talking to Henry, he has like this box of crap that he brings out.
This huge box.
And he says, look, you have worked on your experiment, and I know you succeeded. But I succeeded as well. And he brings out these little tubes that have tiny little people in them. There is, let me see if I have my notes in here. He has a king, a queen.
He brings out the queen. Then he brings out the king.
Does it matter the order? Not really. He has a bishop, a devil, a ballerina, and a mermaid. Okay, and they're all in these little jars. The king keeps breaking out of his jar to go and like molest the queen. And Dr. Pretorius like grabs him with tweezers and puts him back in.
And that's why in Japan they're censored for that.
It got censored for that because it's like disrespecting a monarch or something like that. And again, this is pre-World War II. So, I mean, pre-World War II Japan is pretty darn conservative. He cannot create full-size people for some reason. And then comes, pun intended, the really weird crap, and we're going to get into I'm going to have to get a little bit R-rated on this discussion because I'm shocked it got past the censors, and it's probably because the censors didn't know this. And whoever wrote the screenplay, knew some really obscure crap. He says, Dr. Pretorius says that he grew them from seed.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's a homunculite.
They're homunculi, but hold on. He says he grew them from seed in like a crucible. Okay. And I paused the movie at this point. I said, Darlene, okay, I need to explain this. And you're like, what? Did you really know any of the stuff that I like completely threw at you?
No.
Okay. So again, I'm going to get a tiny bit R-rated here.
You
folks.
made me read out what.
Yeah, and then you're like, oh, that's what he meant? Okay, so if you don't want to listen to this, just skip ahead a few minutes. We'll probably get past it at that point. It's a little R-rated. So homunculi traditionally are made by a man
masturbating
and ejaculating and taking the semen and putting it into a crucible of a horse's womb.
Yes.
It then becomes a clear, unformed human-ish figure that is small. And then you infuse it with blood, and it becomes more and more human until it becomes what you wish it to be. So I knew this because, again, I've read a lot of really weird things.
This is according to something that's from the 1400s.
Yes, but if you listen to how Dr. Pretorius talks about how he created life...
That's how he did it.
That's how he did it. He masturbated into these jars and then put them in a horse's womb.
Or something.
Or something.
We don't know. All we know is that he created these little people. Human.
Okay. But he says, I can do it more, but I just need to perfect my technique. And I'm like, oh, God. Ugh. But we go on here, Darlene, to a couple, when they're creating the bride, how do they create the bride? We know they actually do get some body parts.
They get body parts, yes.
But it's not all body parts.
The heart was... They actually murdered somebody for the heart.
They murder somebody for the heart.
And Dr. Pretorius knows that he's sending out one of his
servants, Carl, to go kill.
But he keeps telling Henry that he's procuring it from a accident victims.
But when Pretorius is like, this skull has a brain that I created myself. Every fold, and he goes on and talks about that. I'm like, oh my God. This guy has been masturbating according to what he has already described and what these little homunculi are. That's what it comes across.
Let's go further.
So now we're not Pretorius created this in a weird way.
Aaron, we're done.
We're done with that. But that is an interesting character because he is incredibly creepy. You read somewhere that he was supposedly coded as being gay? Where did you read that?
No. The coding that was in the thing. One of the reasons they didn't like it is because...
Oh, one of the censors. They thought he was gay?
Were describing him to be gay.
Okay, now, me just watching the movie...
Homosexual.
He did not come across as being...
No, that's why I asked you about it.
He didn't come across as being anything. He just came across as being a mad scientist. A creepy mad scientist. Why anyone would apply a sexuality to him, I don't know. Beyond what I've already said that I'm not going to talk about anymore. Yeah, besides that.
By the way, I should say, if we're going on from something else, the monster is shot twice. Before he actually gets to the blind man.
The blind man is the other thing I want to talk about that's the big deviation in plot. But yeah, before he gets to the blind man, he's actually badly injured. He can be killed.
One of the times is the village. He goes to rescue a shepherdess that falls in the water because she's screaming mad because...
Played by Anne Darling, by the way. Anne Darling.
And she falls in the water. The monster rescues her.
Yes.
And then they shoot him.
Yes. Okay, no, so I maybe should restate what I said about it. He probably can be killed. I think his body can be destroyed, the monster. He can be destroyed, but if you shoot him, he's not really alive, is he?
He's dead. He even says he's dead.
Yeah, he's dead. He doesn't have a heartbeat, does he?
I don't know.
He bleeds a little bit, but he's been shot by large bore hunting rifles.
No, one was in the shoulder.
Yeah, but he's not one with the shoulder. That's the thing. That's what I'm saying.
Well, he was, because
he had blood, but
he
not
had
bleeding
blood
out.
all down his hand from his shoulder when he meets the blind guy.
He was also incredibly badly burned from the mill fire from the first movie. Did you notice that? His hair was gone and everything.
The hand was totally
blistered up.
I don't know if that was from the mill, if that's from him sticking his hand to go get the meat that was on the pit.
That's from the mill. That's from the mill. He does look different in this movie besides just that, because Boris Karloff had to keep his
vision.
No. He had to keep his teeth in this time, because in the first movie he took his dentures out. His they're not dentures. What are they called? They're a bridge. He had to take his teeth out. He didn't have to. He volunteered to do it because he didn't have to talk, right? But it helped give the monster a very sunken cheek look. In this, he had to keep them in, so he does look fuller in the face, even though he theoretically shouldn't be. But let's talk about the blind man.
He's running from the people, and he hears this music, a violin.
He's filled with joy.
And the blind man, because he can't see, takes him in as a friend.
Yeah.
And gives him bread, and this is some of the other...
It's a wonderful scene.
Wine, and gets him hooked on smoking, drinking, and eating.
But no, okay, I'm going to defend this scene. Yes, the monster effectively gets hooked on booze and tobacco. Because, fine, whatever. But the fact is that this blind man offers him shelter.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he's really good.
Offers him food, and the blind man is thankful to God that he has somebody
that's going to talk to him. And these people come and burn down his house, take the hermit out of the blind man out of his cabin, set it afire with the monster in it.
Monster gets away, obviously.
The monster gets away.
But this blind man had nothing but good intent and goodwill. Do you think he would have acted the same way if he saw the monster? No. Because I think that's kind of the point that the movie is trying to make, that the only people that ever treated the monster properly was Maria in the first movie. Because she never saw him as a monster. She just saw him as another child. Right? Because he had a childlike quality to him. Everything in the world was new. It just so happened that Maria ended up being killed by the monster because he didn't understand.
And you don't know how long he's been with the blind man, because he starts to learn how to talk.
Yes, and he can speak barely. Boris Karloff actually gets things to do in this movie acting-wise. And Darlene, I think Boris Karloff is a star in this, for sure. But he starts acting in these scenes really acting in these scenes with the blind man, because this is where he has the joy of the music, and he's clapping, and he has so much love of life. Okay? He loves food, the flavor of it. He loves smoking the cigar because of the experience. He's living in the moment. The wine. He loves it all. And then the blind man goes, no, now it's time to sleep. Let's go to sleep, because now it's time. After we've eaten, we must rest. And You must be tired. And the monster finally just kind of relaxes, and he's like, okay, no, this man won't hurt me. I'm okay here. And
so it's got to be a week or so.
Who knows how long it is.
But then the mob comes, burns the house, and runs the monster through the grave, tearing up the grave.
The point that I'm trying to make is the scenes with the old man are the only time that the monster truly feels like he's welcome and loved. And I think that influences the later movie.
That influences his want for this bride, because all he knows it as is friend. Okay.
Yeah, he wants a friend, but he's angry at Henry. He's angry at being alive.
Henry is terrified of him.
Yeah.
And doesn't want to deal with him at all, because everything in Henry's life went kaput with
yes.
So he wants to. He even says it at one point. It's he when he's talking to Dr. Pretorius. He's like, I want that to be the end of that part of my life. I don't want to go back to it.
Yes, but in some ways, Henry is responsible for his creation. He should be responsible. But the point that I'm trying to make here, Darlene, is that the monster is resentful after the blind man's house is burned down, because he had finally found acceptance, and now all he sees is hate and pain, and he doesn't even want to be alive anymore. And that's where Pretorius promises the monster, I will make you a friend.
Because he runs through the grave and hides into this grave.
This crypt
that Dr. Pretorius is in, doing some weird stuff with bones.
He's doing some weird stuff with bones. And here's the thing. This is what he was doing with the bones, Darlene. Because he didn't have a body. He had a heart and bones. He made everything else.
The heart that he had to kill for. The heart he had before died. They were trying to survive. He was getting Henry to try to make it keep going.
Yes.
And Henry said it was like weak.
Yeah, and it died.
It died.
But remember that he stacks all the bones. Pretorius stacks all the bones on top of the coffin in like
with
that
the
weird
skeleton. Yeah, and drinks a glass of wine or something.
Yeah, and remember that even his assistant said she was beautiful. She must have been beautiful when she died. Remember when they opened up the crypt and all there were bones? That's the body they made into the bride. So all that flesh came from Pretorius.
But it's patchworked.
Yeah. I don't know. Remember, it's about will. Making homunculi is about will as well. So you got to think that Henry being there had an influence on the creation.
I did not get that one.
Oh, dude, it's weird. But that's only because I know this weird shit. Okay, so anyway, we get another scene. The old man is brilliant. The old blind man is brilliant. But we get the scene of the creation of the bride. There's another storm. There's a slight difference in the procedure of making the bride.
You're forgetting the fact that Henry and Elizabeth are married.
Yes.
And Dr. Pretorius, as they're going to go leaving for their honeymoon, he brings the monster in and demands Henry's help.
Yeah.
And he speaks to the monster as they go out the door. He pushes the monster out the door.
Yeah.
And it kind of suggests that Dr. Pretorius says for him to go get Elizabeth.
Yes, and the monster kidnaps Elizabeth, brings her to a cave on the mountain, and holds her hostage, basically for Henry to make him a friend, a bride. So there's the procedure of making the bride. It's a lot like making the monster, but there's slight differences. You can tell that Henry has I don't want to say developed, but let's say adjusted his procedure a bit to make it different, better, maybe more effective.
Well, he has kites now.
He has kites and different electrodes that he uses. Instead of bolts into the neck, the monster has. He just has these big electrical plates that they put up against the skull of the bandaged body.
And the body is totally wrapped like a mummy.
Very intricately wrapped down to individual finger wrappings. Like, according to the actress, she said she could not move when she was in that because it really was the actress in there. That they had to feed her through a straw and everything for like the couple days that she was wrapped in there. But it was very intricately wrapped. They raise her from the dead, and we get my one cringe moment in this entire film. It's when Henry Frankenstein yells, "She's alive, alive!" And it's exactly the same line, except he's alive, from the first movie.
But it's the one that they use in other places, like, what's that?
In the Doctor Who TV movie, it's the first Frankenstein. It's not this one, if that's what you're thinking.
No, the one that uses in Weird Science. That's...
Yeah, it's Weird Science. They use Bride of Frankenstein. But it's the one cringe moment. They unwrap the bride, and we get that classic, Bride of Frankenstein. She's in that kind of white robe. Her hair is huge in this giant, like, beehive with the white shock down its sides, and we know, you and I know, but maybe the listeners don't, that her hair is not black with the white shock down it. It's actually supposed to be red.
Is supposed to be red.
No. It's a white streak, but the hair is supposed red,
to be red,
like bright ginger red.
But she starts screaming when she sees
the monster,
and he says, "She hates me like others. We both belong dead."
Yes, we both belong to be dead. But she doesn't act like the monster did when he first woke up. Did you notice that?
No, she was kind of like puzzled of where she was, what she was doing. And like she was looking for...
It's because in many ways... Well, okay, here's my thought on it. And I don't know if this is what the filmmakers had in mind or not. It's that the monster himself was made of nothing but pieces of people. Okay? That in some way, shape, or form, when we see Henry expose him to the light the first time and he looks up with joy to see the light coming down from that shutter, that we realize that the monster has a soul. Somewhere, somehow, he still has a soul, right? The bride, I don't think, has one, because there's only one real piece. There's two real pieces of her that are a person, and that's the heart and the bones. But the bones were long dead. Everything else is an artificial creation. So what is she acting like to me? When I'm watching her, she's acting almost like a robot, that her head is jerky. She's looking at things not even like a human would. She's looking at them like maybe an insect, that there's nothing really inside of her. There's only like a small part of her that is human, and that's, let's say, the heart, because that's the only thing that was really alive in any way, shape, or form. And her heart says terror whenever the bride sees the monster. Because remember, she's not always acting that way. Like, she'll scream and recoil and then stop and start acting like a robot again. And it's not bad acting. It's very purposeful, the way that the actress was doing this. That Henry and Pretorius were like holding her up, and then she's fine.
She knocks him over.
Yeah, because of the recoil, but then she stops, and she stopped. She's not moving, but her head might tilt in a weird way.
If the monster came at her and wanted to like hug her or something.
Or just touch her. Just to touch her. He's like holding out his hands like he was to the blind man. Or to Maria in the first movie. Like holding out his hands. Because that's like that simple human touch. But here's like, again, she's not human. There's nothing there that is really human left. And I think even though she's screaming, there's something more there that the monster says somewhere inside of him. He's like, she's not right. There's nothing here that's right. We both belong to be dead. We're both supposed to be dead. So that's when the monster throws one of the most amazing freaking knife switch things that I've ever seen in a movie. Remember those knife switches that
was a baseball bat.
It was a really good, yeah. But he throws it, and basically the castle implodes in a giant, like,
Henry and Elizabeth. Elizabeth was at the door, finally screaming from her where she was locked out. Yeah, because she was
able to escape. Yeah.
I don't know if she was escaped or if she...
Yeah, because there was nobody else there. Remember, the two assistants were up on top of the roof with the kites. Monster threw one of them off, at least. So there was no one left there that was guarding her for Pretorius. So Pretorius dies. Supposedly Pretorius dies. Supposedly the monster does, and supposedly the bride does.
Well, the monster kills Pretorius.
Yeah.
Strangles him or something.
And Henry
runs out of the door with Elizabeth, and you don't know what happens to the bride besides that the castle just crumbles on itself.
So two fun facts: the bride is the only one of the major universal monsters to never kill anyone. Like every one of the other ones do. She doesn't. She is the title monster of the movie and is in it for a tiny percentage of the movie, like literally 5 minutes of it. This is Frankenstein Part 2.
Yes, that's what it is.
With a bride on the end. And the bride is
It's the making of the bride.
It's the making of the bride, and the bride just dies immediately. So we've talked a bit about the plot. We've talked about stuff that works and doesn't work already. But okay, let's do our top 2 things that work. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, because I'm not.
Okay. My top things that work is Boris Karloff is a national treasure. He acts his heart out underneath tons of makeup, and you feel bad for the monster all the way up through the burning of the blind man's cabin. Like, your heart is going out to this guy because he is truly, truly a victim, right? And afterwards, through acting and through the plot, but through Boris Karloff's acting, you learn to hate the monster.
Yes, you do.
That finally, the world has beaten him down enough,
and becomes addicted to all our
vices,
all our worst vices. And how does Dr. Pretorius deal with him being? He gives him
whiskey that's
drugged and knocks him out.
Which means he has bodily functions, which means he might actually have a blood system that works, which means you could kill him. Interesting, right? He has to breathe to talk.
He has to eat.
He eats maybe because he feels like he's hungry.
He found out I don't know.
I don't think so. Maybe he did. Maybe I'm just misremembering.
And we're actually starting this movie right at the burning of the mill.
Yeah, the mill.
And we actually didn't talk about them taking Henry. They thought Henry was dead.
And he just kind of wakes up.
And he wakes up.
Yeah, they brought him back to Castle Frankenstein or whatever. Wherever the Baron's house was, and Elizabeth was there, and she was like, let me see him, bring him inside. And yeah, he moves. It's not that he's dead, it's just that he was badly injured, right? That's it. But like, my first thing is Boris Karloff. Best thing about this movie. Second is the whole thing with the blind man. I think that shows human goodness and what it can accomplish. Okay?
If we're not so vain.
Yeah, or if we're not so judgmental. The blind man is just, I mean, he's just an amazing human being. He cares about him, and he does not see the monster. If he saw the monster, I guarantee you he would have freaked out because everybody else
he's
does.
So away from everybody else that he doesn't even know about this whole situation.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't have the prejudgment that there's this monster that killed a child.
Yes. So those are my top 2 things. What are your top 2 things, Darlene? They can be the same. They can be different. It's okay.
I did like the whole scene of the blind hermit, and the monster. It showed.
Yeah. That almost makes the movie to me.
I really feel at a point, with Elizabeth being taken, I like the fact that Henry is upset over it, and he feels the obligation to get it, but he still holds back on some stuff.
He doesn't want to do this. He's doing it just to ensure Elizabeth's safety.
And he's not sure of this Dr. Pretorius on what he'll do.
Dude, Pretorius is an evil SOB and everyone knows it. Like, this guy comes across as being the evil mad scientist, right? Every filmmaking trick in this movie, like that there was developed.
So if the Frankenstein, the Wolfman versus the Frankenstein,
yeah,
was actually the next movie, I would say everything that Dr. Pretorius is now put on Dr. Henry.
Well, I don't think it's okay. I don't think it's the next movie. Now,
I know it's not the next movie, but I'm saying if it was, I think all that stuff that happened here,
yes,
Henry is blamed for it.
Okay, so, remember that Henry Frankenstein, at least in the chronology of these movies and then let's say the Wolfman movies that we've watched, Henry Frankenstein marries Elizabeth in these movies. Theoretically, this movie takes place right afterwards, right? So it's like 1931. Well, let's say it's 1931. And that's very strange because remember, this whole movie is framed as Mary Shelley telling the story, yet we're telling the story as knowing future events, including radio and modern revolvers. I thought that was interesting. But anyway.
But this doesn't have
it has nothing to do with it. What happens in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman that we know? Henry is dead. Has been dead for a long time, and he has an adult daughter. Remember?
Okay.
So what we have is Frankenstein not taking place in 1931. Okay, we have Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman happening sometime in the mid-1940s. Okay, 1943, 1944, something like that, when the movie was made.
It was 46?
Yes. So we're already going to get into problems with the chronology of this, because remember, the body of the bones that we saw Pretorius take out, like, I think the woman died in like 1918 or something like that. That's what they say. So if she's like nothing but bones,
or he could have fed it to.
She's just bones. They open up her casket and she's bones. Let's give them 3 years. 3 years, she's just bones. They had lots of vermin in that casket for whatever reason. Okay, so 1921, and can Henry and Elizabeth produce a daughter that is an adult by 1944? Yes.
1946.
Yeah, no, they can if they have a child immediately, and he can still even work for a while, because she says she remembers her father working on all this stuff. All this is possible as long as Frankenstein does not take place in 1931. It takes place sometime, let's say, in the very early 1920s. Why did I even get onto this tangent? I apologize. You were talking about like how Wolfman versus Frankenstein is weird. Like, when does it take place in relation to this movie? I think there's more Frankenstein movies that take place between. There's more Frankenstein stuff that takes place between this Bride of Frankenstein and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. There has to be.
I know there is. Dracula's 31, Frankenstein is 31, Bride of Frankenstein is 35, Son of Frankenstein is 39, Ghost of Frankenstein is 42, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is in 43, sorry.
So 43.
House of Frankenstein is 44, House of Dracula is 45, Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein is in 48.
Okay, so we still have another movie to watch between like Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman.
We have two.
Okay, so anyway, you were saying you're like, yes, the Blind Hermit was one of your tops. What was your other top?
I don't think I have one besides what you said.
But you also said like Elizabeth, like
she
and Elizabeth and Henry, like trying their love for each other actually seems to be a real thing.
Well, it tries to be
hard, but it's not. I mean, it's weak. Let's say it's weak because it's not the point of the movies, right?
No, it's not the fourth thing of the movie.
What are your two worst things? Because there are things that totally don't work.
Many.
No, top two things that don't work.
Okay, Minnie, I was going to explain to you. She wasn't in the first one.
Oh, you're talking about Minnie, not Minnie. Minnie the maid.
Minnie the maid, yes.
She is a bitch.
She is the personification of why the mob is the mob.
Yeah.
She's
an instigator.
She is the gossip mill. She is the fear. She is the everything that is bad of this village.
Yeah. And she works for Henry Frankenstein as like a maid.
Yes.
She's awful. Okay. But is that good for the story though? Or I'm saying like what does not work in this movie? What are your top two things that don't work? I think she works for the story though, even though she's an awful human being, is like she's an interesting character in that she does propel the plot forward. Her badness does propel the plot forward. I would disagree if you
she's too far in the face though of it. It's okay. Like, and the other thing I have is all the Catholic Christian ideology that's in there.
I don't mind that at all. I think it perfectly works for the subject matter of the film. You're raising somebody from the dead. In many ways, this is like an allegory. I think the imagery that they're using in this film works. Like I can't say it doesn't work. I think it's entirely appropriate. I would disagree with you. It's okay that you have that opinion. I just disagree. I think it's more appropriate when the monster is actually tipping over the iconography in the cemetery because he's lashing out at it. Because maybe at a subconscious level, he understands his connection to that kind of metaphor. Or because the blind hermit was talking about religion, about God, and all of that. And maybe he learned about Catholicism or Christianity. I don't know. I think it's fine. If you would ask me what the top two things that I would say don't work in this movie is that this movie is titled Bride of Frankenstein and the bride is only in it for like the last 5 minutes and she does nothing. And it's a shame because I think both the actress that played the bride, who also played Mary Shelley in the beginning of the movie, same actress, is a good actress. She's been in many things after this and before this. She is actually a good actress. She has stage presence, very much so when she's as the bride. Like, she's very striking. She commands the scene. Maybe is it because she's 7 feet tall plus her hair? I don't know. Because they put her on stilts and everything. She's actually a short actress. But she's striking. I think it's a crime against this movie that it's Bride of Frankenstein and the bride is in it for 5 minutes.
I'm just going to say this. We have other movies
that are like that.
That are very much like that.
But you know what, Darlene? It's a sin no matter which movie we're talking about when it's like that. I think it's a shame. I think it's a disservice to the movie-going audience, and I think it's a disservice to the movie itself. Okay. My second thing that I think does not work. The little homunculi. As much as I've already talked about them, they add nothing to the movie except severe weirdness. And if you know anything about homunculi or have listened to me talk about what they are, because I'm not going to go into it again, it is messed up. And this is a 1935 film where theoretically children can watch this. Obviously, they don't know about that unless they've read weird things like I have.
And they made these things look like little dolls. And that would have really...
And like the king was
lecherous, like Henry VIII. It was,
and Pretorius just kind of like fawned over this little mermaid. Like he was like, yes, this little mermaid. Like,
and this ballerina doesn't do anything but this.
She only dances from this certain song or whatever, and I'm like, oh, dude, you play with these things. I mean, but then again, that could all be because of like me knowing about the homunculi myths.
It is,
but it really off-put me. It really off-put me. It does
look like it's the same creepy feeling I got when it was those little people.
What, Attack of the Puppet People?
Yes.
Or is it
Attack of the Puppet People?
Okay.
And there was a bad thing of the name too, and so is She-Wolf of London was a bad name for.
Oh, come on! But She-Wolf of London, I understood why they named it that, and I thought that movie was really good. Now, hold on, I've kind of given my two things that are good and bad. You've given your two things good and bad.
I didn't give
seems
bad.
Like we're
besides Minnie,
and you said.
Maybe I did.
You're like the whole love thing didn't. Well, I mean, you liked that.
I liked the love.
Well, name another one then, Darlene. Minnie and what? You didn't like Minnie, but you said the religious iconography. You didn't like that, and I thought I could not say. I disagree with both of you.
What about the beginning of being with Shelley?
That was confusing. I don't think it didn't work, but I don't think it worked. I think it's okay.
Is that a reason why I might have never seen it? Is that somebody cut it out?
No, I think it's because it's almost a non sequitur to the movie. And in some ways it's a non sequitur. Like it just really doesn't belong.
I can't even remember what Shelley said about Frankenstein. She said there was something that it was describing how bad
modern Prometheus. Like I thought she even used that byline from the original novel. Like this is a modern Prometheus. It's supposed to be like this religious allegory in some ways. I'll be honest, I didn't pay attention. I didn't like firmly pay attention to the dialogue because I was confused and trying to figure out what the hell was going on. I've seen this movie dozens of times. I honestly don't remember that scene. It is possible they cut it out. But it's also possible that I only connect that first opening scene with Shelley with other movies because it doesn't fit with the rest of the film.
No.
So I always think it's a different film. Maybe that's where it was in the back of my head.
Because I can't even place it with this movie.
Then again, Darlene, looking back on this movie, not this time that we watched it, but like as a child, what scenes do you remember from this movie?
Definitely the bride.
Yes, the bride. The last 5 minutes of the bride.
I didn't remember anything about the hermit.
You want me to talk about the hermit really quick? Because I have a theory on all of this. This movie, The Hermit, I don't remember the hermit in this film. I remembered the hermit in Frankenstein. I put almost every single other memorable scene in the back of my head as being in the first Frankenstein movie. And here's why. Here's my theory on this. This is a sequel. This is made 4 years later. But this is directed by the same people, written by the same people, starring the same people.
So you think this was added?
No. What I'm saying is that in the back of our heads, because I'll be honest, I probably haven't watched this since I was a teenager. So I haven't watched it for 30 years. That in the back of our head, because the major chunks of this movie fit so well with the first movie that we just don't separate them. The only thing that truly separates this from the first movie is the bride.
And Dr.
In the back of our head. In the back of our head.
We throw out Dr. Perter.
Because he's just weird.
He's just creepy.
We throw out the fact that the monster's not talking in the first movie and he's talking in this. Because it just kind of fits that he does start talking at some point. So to me, here's my end thoughts. I'm gonna try to sum up my thoughts on this. I recommend this film. I don't recommend this film because it is a good movie on its own. I don't think it is.
No.
I highly recommend this movie because it is firmly an extension of the first movie, and you truly cannot understand the story.
All second ones, they're not one, they're not standalones. Two, they're not as good as the first one.
What I'm trying to say is that this second movie, in many ways, is the first movie. It is pieces of the first movie. To me, the movie itself, I'm not talking about the story, that the first movie is extended in this.
So do you think that they took some of the filming?
No, I'm not saying that, Darlene.
Okay.
I'm saying that just by watching this, because it's so similar, that we connected in our heads. Not that it actually was filmed at the same time. So I recommend this movie because if you liked Frankenstein, I think you almost need to watch this to get the bigger story. But if you didn't like Frankenstein, don't watch this. It's going to be even weirder.
And it's worse.
But I highly recommend it. Like, I still think this movie's like a 7 out of 10.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying it's like all number twos. It doesn't stand by itself. Most second movies don't stand by themselves.
Most don't.
And they're never as good as the first one.
Well, most aren't as good as the first one. We shouldn't make any... Because I'll make arguments of movies that are the sequels are better.
Fine.
But yeah, you know what I'm saying. Yeah, I know what you're saying. You know what I'm saying. So I gave it a 7 out of 10. I recommend it. You recommend it. What's your out of 10, though, on it?
About a 6.
6 out of 10? Yeah.
A little bit above, just for the creepy lab, the...
Dude, Dr. Pretorius was firmly creepy in this.
I'm not talking about I'm talking about the lab equipment,
Yeah. But I'm also talking about
the settings,
I think Colin Clive's alcoholism paid off in this. But Henry Frankenstein, the guy that plays Henry Frankenstein, was a bad alcoholic, even in the first movie. His alcoholism progressed. And in this movie, he was even worse. But it worked in his favor for this because he looked really unsettled and crazy. I'm not saying, hey, be an alcoholic. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, it didn't harm the filming of the movie. That's interesting. Usually that kind of stuff does.
Yeah, like Belushi.
Well, yeah, Belushi and Blues Brothers, where he just kind of wandered off set in a drug-fueled haze. They had to go find him in a suburb of Chicago, sleeping on somebody's couch, eating a sandwich. Well, after eating a sandwich. Stories and stories from Blues Brothers. I enjoyed this movie, though. You know what? My final thought on it is I'm really glad to have watched this now that I'm in my 40s, and it's been so long since I watched it, just because of that feeling that I just talked about, of it being all the important parts of this movie actually felt like they were in the back of my head as a part of Frankenstein. So now that I understand there is a separation. You know what it also could be from?
And what is it about these movies, okay, that they always have creepy lab assistants?
Because that's a trope of the time. Like
because Henry had the guy that would beat the crap out of the monster, and then this guy had this Carl
who that just went out and murdered girls,
murdered people, and we don't actually see who's the second assistant that.
It's Carl and somebody else. I don't know. Do they ever even say his name? Is it Ludwig?
I don't know.
I don't know either. It doesn't really matter. There's only a couple important characters in this: the monster. Dr. Pretorius. You remember his name. He is firmly creepy.
Well, I had to look up what Pretorius come from.
Yeah. Henry and Elizabeth. And the bride. But the bride is like a pointless name for a device that just screams a couple times.
And Elizabeth is reverted to the secondary. So does Henry get played as secondary characters.
Two different actresses played Elizabeth. Between this movie and the first movie, which do you think was the better performance?
Well, you can't grade it because...
No, I'm just talking about performance, like with what you see on the screen, not like how good the character is.
Okay, Aaron, can I say what I was going to say?
Yeah, go ahead.
she isn't in there as much as the other one, so you can't really grade it.
I would still say, based on what we see, just on what we see, the first movie is a better Elizabeth. I think she has more to do in this movie, though. That's the thing, the character of Elizabeth. It's just that what she does in this movie is kind of... Anyway, we'll leave it there because we're babbling. I don't know what we're going to watch next. Don't know. We'll find something. I hope everybody enjoyed. So I'm Aaron.
I'm Darlene. Good evening.
And keep watching the skies.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.